Hey guys, Rainy Potato here, bringing you a tier list for all the hero paths in Darkest Dungeon 2, as of the latest update patch that has added the Vestal to the roster. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe. I post new content every day. First up is the Plague Doctor, still the reigning heal champ. Let's start with Surgeon. You get max HP, more healing, 50% damage to incision, and only costs you blight application, which doesn't matter because you only care about stab with this path. This is an easy OP tier path. I'm always a fan of max HP for maximum survivability and easier recovery. Incision has restrictive positioning, but with Surgeon it does fantastic damage with a dot on top with no cooldowns or other restrictions. And of course, the healing makes the best healer in the game even better, and makes your team very hard to kill. At this point, I don't even consider PD a blight hero because this path is just so strong. Next is Alchemist. You gain blight application and crit on your blight skills, along with some dot resist boosts. Your max HP gets absolutely gutted, making you vulnerable to one-hits. Frankly, to make this balanced, they'd need to add another 30% to the dot resists, but despite the massive downsides, this is still a strong slot in rank 4 because the scaling on her blight is absolutely absurd. And the application chance makes it so you don't have to waste slots on that aspect. You can head straight to the feeder and deck yourself out with big scaling damage. The existence of Cause of Death also makes this blight damage a bit easier to convert to front load if that's necessary. Slips into the very strong tier as a high risk, high reward path. Physician is the debuff path, nerfing her dot damage while applying various minor buffs to her lesser used skills like Ounce, Vapors, and Disorienting Blast. The problem is all of these skills are still relatively weak, even with the various buffs, and the tempo of all these skills is absolutely terrible. If a hero is going to have 0 damage output, I want them to at least be a tank, but here you just have some mostly frivolous token play. The biggest issue is you have other heroes that give your allies tokens and can debuff enemies, while also playing other roles at the same time, instead of being your only role with Physician. This relative weakness puts this in the trash tier, even though the path is technically playable. Next is Grave Robber, starting with the generic Deadeye path. Flat range damage boost in exchange for melee damage, with a minor crit buff and move resist elimination. The main issue here is, except for Pirouette, which is an opener with a long cooldown, she doesn't really do direct range damage at all. Her damage is based on dots and crits. It's fine as a path and fits in the solid tier, but nothing impressive, and it severely limits your already limited kit to a handful of skills. Nightsworn is a bit more exciting, giving you boosted lunge and pirouette damage, a big boost to stealth damage, while nuking your HP to one hit range. While the damage boost is at least relevant to high damage skills, the stealth component is still harder to play around, and her whole kit being movement makes it so you have to build your whole team around her, while also devising a plan to protect her. It's certainly stronger than Deadeye, but much riskier, so it fits just ahead in the solid tier. And finally we have Venomdrop, which despite receiving a buff is still simply a meme. You lose range damage and speed, gain a small blight on flashing daggers, and additional blight when stealthed. While flashing daggers can be cool in trash fights, except in the sluice and feeder since you don't gain application with this path. Otherwise, for the most part, this is just a poison dart spam build that does less overall damage and is slower than Deadeye, while the small buff to stealth is better utilized on Nightsworn. Definitely still a trash tier path, despite the legion of memers swearing that this path is usable now. I'll slap it above Physician just because it's fun and can still at least do some damage. Next up is Highwayman with his Rogue path. This path gives damage in rank 1, nerfs you in the back row, and adds a riposte token to point blank shot. I had this path left for dead, and it's still quite inferior to Sharpshot of course, but with the new Vestal mechanics this path has a use case again. It's certainly not a low damage path, as both PBS and Slice can deal very solid damage, but you entirely lack range and of course need a front row partner who can cater to you, or at least a jester. This counts out Leper and Hellion most of the time, so you almost always pair this with a Man-at-Arms, which is fine. Outside of the Seraph Encore build, this really doesn't do much and falters in comparison with other front row DPS, but it certainly fits at the top of the solid tier at least. Next we have Sharpshot. range damage buff and speed putting you at the 8th threshold, even at Infernal, strength on Grapeshot, all in exchange for a small nerf to melee damage that you'll never use anyways. This is a disgustingly OP path that fits in every team comp, against any act, and frankly any boss. This is literally just Highwayman Plus, makes Grapeshot from mediocre to an absolute powerhouse, and can utilize the OP Sprawl trinkets without any speed adjustments. Easily in the OP tier above Surgeon, a strong case for the best overall path in the game. Finally comes his meme path, Yellowhand. Your range damage gets obliterated, but you gain max HP. Your melee damage nerfs bleed resist, making it easier to get your open vein in play. And you get small buffs to highway robbery and double cross. The problem with this path is you're nerfing your best damage primarily for some HP and redundant buffs to robbery and cross. These buffs become basically irrelevant on mastery, and open vein is still absolute trash even with the very slow debuff. The HP is nice but matters little without a way to utilize it. I put this at the top of the trash heap because while it's certainly a usable path, the fact is that it falters against all his other paths, even Wanderer, and makes it non-viable for non-meme runs. Man-at-Arms is next, our tank and the first hero with 3 strong paths. First up is Sergeant, the tankish path. You lose damage, but gain 100 move resist, a chance to give massive dot resist to your party every turn, as well as remove negative tokens on yourself with Bolster. The damage nerf is noticeable since Man-at-Arms can be a serviceable DPS in Darkest Dungeon 2, but the dot resist can deliver much needed, if hard to notice, sustain to your party. The move resist can help in a number of scenarios, including absolutely obliterating the Exemplar by parking in rank 4 and just daring him to try and pull you. It's not a flashy path and the damage nerf is noticeable, but it improves on the Man-at-Arms base kit for the most part, which is enough to slip this into the back end of the very strong category. Bulwark nerfs his best skills, Crush and Retribution, while buffing his lesser used shield skills, namely Rampart and Hold the Line, and also grants Taunt to stand fast. Despite this is a very strong path, just above Sergeant as the truer tank path, that can also dish out damage if necessary. If stand fast is upgraded, you can alternate that and Retribution every round to absolutely absorb anything almost any enemy can throw at you, even if your riposte does slightly less damage. The damage on Rampart and Hold the Line is fine, and the stun chance is much more relevant now with the day's stun mechanic, so if you're not interested in playing turtle mode, you can absolutely deal out some punishment, just less than other classes. It misses out on the top category just because turtle mode is not as ideal a way to play as more aggressive styles. I put it right above Sergeant. And finally we have Vanguard, an easy OP tier path that has already been nerfed once and is still standing strong. You get max HP on your already giga beefy tank, and this time you get your strongest damage moves, Crush and Retribution, a solid buff. All this costs you is dot resist, which for the most part is handled by your bigger HP pool. Just slightly weaker as a pure turtle tank than Bulwark, this path is still among the strongest tanks in the game and deals out surprisingly strong damage with respectable range with Crush. Definitely beats out Sharpshot because of the dual rolls. Next up, Hellion. Ravager gives her more HP, more damage in rank 1, the only rank she should be in, while nerfing her bleed application, who cares, and giving a chance of self-bleed every round. This is simply just Hellion Plus. The downsides literally never matter, and you get flat damage on arguably the best DPS in the game. She's dominant against any act and any lair boss already, and giving her this simple boost easily puts this path at the back of the please nerf OP tier. Berserker is the Bleed Hellion path, and Bleed Hellion sucks. You get a boost application and bleed skill crit, and in exchange your HP gets nuked and you get some DBR to compensate. This is a horrific trade-off, buffing your most useless skills in exchange for an HP nerf that forces you to rely on DBR for your frontliner to survive. Never an intelligent decision. Bleed out can be pretty good with this path, obviously, but that's such a restrictive move positionally, and again, forcing such a low HP hero into rank 1 is generally not a smart move. Because of how pathetic this path is compared to Ravager, I've got to toss it at the top of the trash tier. And finally we have Carcass, finally an interesting build. This completely changes Hellion into a tank, giving her winded every turn in exchange for free block generation and taunt on Barbaric Yop. The main problem I have with this path is you lose so much tempo having a tank that does literally nothing else. I'd much rather have a Man-at-Arms fighting back. Yop is pretty solid sustain, however, and the fact that you have 2 self-heals, a party stress heal, and some bleed as backup slips this into the back of the solid tier. This path is underwhelming like other turtle classes, but isn't an awful choice if you can surround her with DPS. Next up is the singular new addition to Darkest Dungeon 2, the Runaway. Garbage at launch, she has become a solid hero with updates. First up is Arsonist. You get burn application and crit, while losing damage and gaining chance of self-burn on turn start. The damage doesn't matter because this path is solely about camping in rank 4 and spamming Firefly, but the burn can be troublesome with this average HP hero. This is, however, my favorite runaway path. It's obviously quite boring, but like all dot heroes, getting free application chance is crucial for dealing consistent damage. This application chance allows you to farm actual scaling trinkets instead of wasting slots. And of course, burn is the easiest dot to scale. Any trip to the sprawl should net you a plethora of options, far better than blight or bleed heroes. And with her application chance, she can burn any of the random mobs in this area, though she remains useless against the librarian. Definitely above Alchemist in the very strong tier. Survivor used to be generic 1A+, and was pretty bad then, but for some reason they decided to nerf it even harder by losing burn application in exchange for a healing buff on situational skills, and giving you some tokens to start combat. She just does not do well as a pure support class, and her direct damage is pathetic, so despite the situational heal buff, which is significant, I can't put this anywhere but the trash tier, probably below even Venomdrop. One major problem is her only real attack is a movement skill, which already limits your team and could push her out of position for the whole reason for the path, her heal. Bad and boring build. Orphan is an interesting build, giving you increased dots in the back ranks in exchange for nerf damage, and vice versa up front, with lower HP and a crit token on Firestarter. Usually you run this like Arsonist, rank 4 and just spam Firefly, this time with less application chance but more potential scaling. However, the front row damage can make for some interesting builds, most notably the only really viable backdraft build. It's not good, especially with nerfed HP, but it at least gives your team options. It's certainly weaker than Arsonist, being less consistent and of course being more fragile, but I have no problem slipping it at the back of the very strong tier. Jester is arguably the most versatile hero in the game, though he is strongest with a very specific build. He has 3 solidly distinct paths. Let's start with the best, Virtuoso. This is simply Jester Plus, and being Jester Plus is great. You get enough speed to push you to the front of most turn orders and utilize the rare sprawl trinkets. You can apply a stress resist buff to your party on turn start and gain max HP, though you do lose dot resist. The speed enables the most simple and powerful 3-turn loop in the game. Open every combat with Encore, and then into solo finale on the subsequent turns. You don't even need more than these with your Jester, though Inspiring Tune and either Ballad or Play Out round out your kit for some nice utility. The strength of opening Encore can't be understated, allowing you to let your tank set up taunt early, your Vestal to set up buffs early, or your slow DPS to get an early kill before the enemy can even act. Disgustingly OP, and definitely goes above Sharpshot in the top tier. Soloist is the bleed Jester path, and it's quite awful. You get a small damage boost, bleed application and crit, but you lose speed and HP, making you a dreadfully slow glass cannon. Slow dot heroes are awful for obvious reasons, and sometimes you can just get obliterated before you get a chance to act. The Jester's bleed skills are okay, but bleed is the hardest dot to scale, and you're not doing much direct damage even with the buff. You can of course make this a finale Jester, but then you're forcing yourself into rank 4 where you can't utilize your bleed skills at all, and even with the damage you'd rather run solo finale with Virtuoso instead. It's certainly more flexible than Berserker, but just barely, and easily fits in the trash tier. Intermezzo is the buff bot Jester build. All his song skills bleed, both on your heroes and on the enemies with solo. This is usually quite annoying, but pairing with a runaway turns this to a benefit. Echoing March becomes almost usable with a bleed attached, and Inspiring Tune also provides stress resist. The real meat of this path is the additional token added to Battle Ballad and Play Out. Unfortunately, this path is still quite mediocre, as pure Buffbot Jester isn't the best way to play in my opinion. The extra tokens are random, and of course you need a mobile team to not mess up your lineup with these skills, and their positional limitations become quite annoying when you're in the meat of your hero. Without the HP nerf of Soloist, however, this fits above Carcass in the solid category, and it can be a powerhouse with the right setup, but again, I'd rather just run Virtuoso. Next is Big Daddy Leper. Tempest is the Chad path, giving Chop even higher damage, buffing your debuff resist, making you practically immune to disease, while nerfing your HP and speed. Your speed is already pathetic, and your high base HP keeps Tempest relatively safe, making this almost a Leper Plus path. The debuff obviously keeps blinds off your bar, letting you chop with reckless abandon. Of course, the same limitations base Leper has are present, with the combat start blind needing solved, along with his wide damage range, lack of reach, and lack of block penetration. However, with the right setup, there is no hero that can compare to this damage output. With the addition of Vestal and Consecration of Light, you could have a dangerous pairing, as any sort of crit on Leper means GG for your opponents. I slot it at the top of the very strong category. Poet is the tank path, giving your stun and move resist, along with Solemnity buff, while nerfing your damage. The main problem I have with this path are the buffs aren't really relevant in comparison with paths that buff real skills or stats, and you don't really have block generation outside limited withstand usage. You're also required to be in rank 1 to be useful with Intimidate, Spam, and Purge. His base kit and of course Intimidate still make this a powerful tank class, however, along with his ability to melt away his own stress and full heal. I'm pretty comfortable with this at the top of the solid tier. Monarch is the escort mission path, gutting your HP and damage in normal fights, but buffing you against Cosmic, which include of course the Exemplar, the mountain mobs, and all act bosses. You also gain Vuln application on Purge and Intimidate. The problem here is the buff to Cosmic just isn't very strong, making you a weaker Tempest with some extra HP. It's not worth being useless the rest of the run. The extra Vuln on Purge and Intimidate are nice, but you don't really want to be intimidating with your debuffed HP, though you sort of have to be relevant. If the Cosmic buffs were stronger, this would be an acceptable path, but for now I dump it at the top of the trash heap. The Occultist has 3 distinct useful paths. Let's start with Ritualist. You get a nice healing boost. Unfortunately, 33% of 0 is still 0. And a boost to your debuff skills, while getting a chance to generate tokens whenever you use your 2 cursing skills. In exchange, you have a chance to gain Vuln at turn start. As noted before, the healing rarely matters, but adding debuff chance to 2 of the best debuffs in the game is a strong benefit, and of course you get your own buffs as well with this path. The Vuln can definitely hurt, but there are ways to play around it with tanks. Debuffs are more relevant given more application, but I'd still mostly rather be doing direct damage in a lot of cases. Still, there's nothing wrong with this path. I certainly slot it above Rogue in the solid tier. Next up is Warlock. You gain range damage in exchange for max HP, while also having a chance to self-generate unchecked power. This is a high-risk, high-reward path. Your HP is pathetic, and the self-burn you generate with unchecked power makes this the most fragile hero in the game overall, but you will be doing a lot of meatball damage with the free unchecked power generation. Your Spaghetti also gets a juicy buff as well. I can't in good faith, however, put this in the strong tier because the fragility is just too high, and you still need to use Offering to guarantee your top damage range because of the RNG nature of power generation. Right above Poet in my eyes. Aspirant is the tanky melee occultist, giving you max HP, a free block plus at turn start, and melee damage, in exchange for a nerf to debuff chance and resist. You also get an Anamnesis buff, but that skill is still worthless. This has become my favorite occultist path as I have come to value max HP and overall survivability more and more. Your melee is still relatively weak, but with the high crit rate and reach, stab can become serviceable. This is also the best path to use Burning Stars in my opinion, because while you don't have the Warlock benefits, you do have enough HP to tank the self-damage and dots. A solid fit in rank 2 or 3, I slip this into the back of the very strong tier, because of the versatility provided. Now on to the newest hero, the Vestal. The Vestal has a new path system that changes skills directly, as well as changed how she gains conviction tokens. Let's start with Confessor, the debuff Vestal. You gain conviction every round, and your skills change to make you a debuff hero. Hand of Light becomes front AoE weak, and Judgment adds weakened Vaughn with conviction. The problem is the same I have with all debuff heroes: lack of application chance, bad tempo, and frankly, Confessor is the worst of them all. Hand of Light is cute, but I dislike front row Vestal unless I'm running Bonk tank, and the Judgment change is just a huge flat nerf. The conviction is quite slow to come as well, with no way of speeding it up unlike other paths. It's certainly not trash, but frankly I put it even behind Carcass in the solid tier. Chaplain is the tank path. You gain conviction when hit, and your mantra is changed to affect guarded heroes instead. Your upgraded mantra gets a nice buff, as does guard, but your Hand of Light for some reason takes a nerf. Tank Vestal is certainly a solid build, but I still prefer back row Vestal, and conviction can be hard to come by if you don't force it. Without much self-sustain like the other tanks, this is the weakest tank class in my opinion. However, when you do get set up right, you can balance your mediocre tank skills with some solid DPS with Mace Bash. However, this is dreadfully slow to set up and isn't the best payoff for all the work required. Firmly in the solid tier, probably right behind Poet. And finally, Seraph, the love of my life. This path extends your consecrations for an insane 5 turns, giving you an absurd amount of token generation for one press of the button. Your mantra also gets a juicy buff, making Seraph the strongest potential healer in the game. The only issues with Seraph are generic Vestal issues, namely her speed. While she's great in all scenarios, if you pair her with a Virtuoso Jester, it's absolutely game over. No enemy comp can stand in your way of complete domination. Absolutely unequivocally an OP path in the please nerf category, above Sharpshot, and frankly probably tied with the other top paths in the game. I left the tier list maker in the description. I'd like to see your tier list and hear your opinions in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. I post new content every day.